Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty fundamental, the concept of information. And yeah, you might be interested in this for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe you're prepping for a big presentation, or maybe you're just trying to get your head around some complex topic, or hey, maybe you're just curious about reality itself. We're going to be looking at oninformation.txt today, which dives headfirst into this whole idea.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting things about this source is that its core argument is that the popular idea that reality is made of information, like some giant simulation, is
Yeah.
fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about. I mean, we're so used to dealing with information all the time on our phones, at our computers, like everywhere. It's almost like we take it for granted.
Exactly. And oninformation.txt really challenges us to step back and examine what we actually mean when we use that word. The source has two main goals. First, to define information accurately, stripping away all those common misconceptions. And second, to use that clear definition, to debunk the whole simulation theory.
So let's dive right in. I think a lot of us can relate to looking at our hard drives, packed with gigabytes and gigabytes of data, and thinking, wow, that's a lot of information. But according to this source, that's not quite right.
Right. The source points out that hard drives don't actually contain information in the purest sense. What they store are intricate patterns, arrangements of electrons and photons, that we've designed to represent information, like a code we've created.
So it's not really information on our hard drives. Then what is it?
Think of it this way. Your hard drive isn't storing bits and bytes. It's manipulating these tiny particles. According to the laws of physics, we give those patterns meaning. We interpret them as information based on the systems we've built.
Okay, so if what's on my hard drive isn't truly information, what is information? What's the real definition?
Well, this is where Claude Shannon comes in, the father of information theory. He defined information as a number derived from the probability of events occurring.
That sounds a bit abstract, to be honest. How does that definition play out in the real world?
It might sound complex at first, but it's actually incredibly elegant and powerful. Let's use a simple example. Imagine rolling a die. There are 6 possible outcomes, right? Each roll gives us a certain amount of information, specifically because it reduces our uncertainty about which side landed face up.
So there's actual measurable information in a die roll. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. And the amount of information depends on the probability of each outcome. Since each face of a fair die has an equal chance of landing, the information gained from a single roll is about 2.585 bits.
Hold on, bits. We're going from dice rolls to computer lingo now.
Well, in this context, a bit is the basic unit of information. It's not a physical thing, but a way of quantifying how much uncertainty is reduced when we learn something new.
So the more possibilities, the more information it takes to pinpoint the actual outcome. That makes sense. But how does all of this connect back to the idea of reality being made of information? Or not, as the source argues?
That's where things get really interesting. The source draws a parallel between Shannon's information theory and a fundamental concept in physics, entropy.
Entropy, isn't that like a measure of disorder?
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that both entropy and information are essentially about counting possible states of a system. The more possible states a system has, the higher its entropy, and the more information it takes to describe its current state.
Okay, so maybe think of a messy room. Tons of possible arrangements for all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So high entropy. But if you tidy up, you reduce the number of possible arrangements, hence lower entropy.
Precisely. And tidying up is like gaining information. You're imposing order,
Mm-hmm.
reducing uncertainty, and making the room's state easier to describe.
So information isn't creating reality. It's more about how we perceive and organize the existing reality.
Exactly. It's about the patterns and structures we observe and how we use those observations to understand and interact with the world around us. And this, according to the source, is where the simulation argument stumbles.
All right, I'm definitely hooked now. Let's unpack this simulation idea a bit more. How does the source use this definition of information to debunk it?
Well, the simulation argument often falls into a trap. It assumes that information is somehow more fundamental than the physical reality it describes. It imagines a computer outside of our reality, manipulating bits to create our world.
So are we just characters in some cosmic video game? That's a wild thought.
It's a popular idea for sure, but the source pushes back against this notion. It argues that believing information is the base reality leads to logical inconsistencies. For instance, where did this hypothetical supercomputer come from? What's it made of?
It's like saying the code in a video game somehow wrote itself. It just doesn't add up.
Exactly. oninformation.txt suggests that the simulation idea comes from misunderstanding the nature of information. We can describe fantastic things using information, but that doesn't make them real.
So it's like confusing the map for the territory, right?
Yeah.
We can create incredibly detailed maps, but the map itself isn't the actual landscape.
That's a great way to put it. And the source argues that by focusing on understanding the true nature of information, its relationship to probability entropy and our own perception, we can gain a much deeper appreciation for the complexity and wonder of reality itself, without resorting to the simulation hypothesis.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on how we interact with the world around us. So if information is really about how we perceive and organize things, does that mean reality is ultimately subjective? Or is there some underlying order we're all tapping into?
Those are great questions, and ones that have fascinated philosophers and scientists for centuries. And luckily for us, oninformation.txt delves into these very questions.
Well, I, for one, am eager to keep exploring. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll continue unraveling the mysteries of oninformation.txt. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to our deep dive into oninformation.txt. When we left off, we were pondering a pretty profound question. If information is tied to our individual perception, does that mean objective reality is just an illusion?
Right. It is kind of mind-bender to think that our understanding of the world might be filtered through our own unique lenses. So where does oninformation.txt go from there?
The source tackles this head-on, acknowledging that the observer-dependent nature of information can make things feel a bit uncertain. But it also offers a really interesting perspective on how we can navigate this. It suggests that while our individual perceptions may influence our understanding of reality, there's still a common ground, a shared structure we're all interacting with.
So it's not like we're all living in our own separate realities, completely cut off from each other.
Not at all. Oninformation.txt highlights how shared experiences in communication and developing common ways of understanding things play a huge role in shaping our collective view of reality. We're constantly testing and refining our perceptions through how we interact with the world and with each other.
It's like we're all working on a massive puzzle together, each of us bringing our own piece to the table. And even though those pieces might be shaped by our individual perspectives, they still fit together to create a complete picture.
That's a fantastic analogy. The source also points to the importance of things like language and math and scientific inquiry in building this shared framework for understanding the world. These systems of representation help us communicate our observations, test our ideas, and build a body of knowledge that goes beyond any single person's viewpoint.
So it's not that objective reality is an illusion, but rather that we're always working towards a better understanding of it through observation, interpretation, and collaboration.
Exactly. And oninformation.txt makes a really important distinction here. It differentiates between information as a tool for describing reality and information as the building block of reality itself.
Okay, I think I'm following. We can use information to describe all sorts of things, from the laws of physics to the plot of our favorite movie. But that doesn't mean those things are made of information.
But precisely, it's like saying a painting of a sunset is made of sunset. The painting represents the sunset, capturing some of its essence, but it's not the sunset itself.
That's a really helpful analogy. So when we talk about information in the context of a computer program, for example, we're really talking about a set of instructions we've created to manipulate physical processes, like the flow of electricity or the arrangement of magnetic particles on a hard drive.
Exactly. And those physical processes exist. Whether or not our information systems are there to describe them, the information is just our way of harnessing and controlling those processes to achieve specific outcomes.
So information isn't creating reality. It's more like we're using information to interact with and shape the reality that already exists.
You got it. This source makes a similar point when it talks about the difference between bits as abstract units of information and the physical systems we use to represent those bits.
Right. Those ones and zeros we hear so much about in the digital world. They aren't actually little particles floating around in cyberspace, are they?
Not at all. They're just symbols. Convenient ways for us to represent the presence or absence of a signal, a voltage, a magnetic orientation, or some other physical state.
It's fascinating to think that we've built this whole symbolic language to describe the world. But sometimes we forget that the language itself is separate from the reality it describes.
And that's where some of the confusion around the simulation idea comes in. We can get so caught up in the power of our information systems that we start to think they're somehow more fundamental than the physical reality they're based on.
It's easy to fall into that trap thinking that because we can simulate something on a computer, reality itself must be a simulation. But that's a pretty big leap.
It is. And oninformation.txt does a great job of breaking down why that logic doesn't quite hold up. It points out the inherent circularity of the simulation argument.
What do you mean by circular?
The simulation argument suggests that our reality is the result of some advanced computer program running on a supercomputer outside our universe. But then the question becomes, where did that supercomputer come from? What's it made of? If everything is information, where does the chain end?
Yeah, it does seem like that just pushes the question back another step, not really answering it. It's turtles all the way down.
Exactly. Oninformation.txt suggests that rather than getting lost in these endless loops of hypothetical simulations, it's more productive to focus on understanding the nature of reality itself.
That makes a lot of sense. But it's also a bit humbling, isn't it? To think that we might never have a complete or definitive answer to the question of where it all began.
Humbling, yes, but also incredibly exciting. There's still so much we don't know about the universe and our place within it. It's that very quest for knowledge, that drive to understand, that makes the journey so fascinating.
I totally agree. It's like we're explorers charting uncharted territories. And speaking of uncharted territories, I'm really interested to hear more about how oninformation.txt connects information to the fabric of reality itself. We touched on this earlier with the idea of entropy, but I'm ready to delve even deeper.
That's a perfect segue into the next section of oninformation.txt, where the source explores the fascinating relationship between information and entropy in even more detail.
Entropy, I'll admit it's a concept that sometimes makes my head spin. Isn't it all about disorder and chaos?
Well, it's often misunderstood, but entropy is actually a key to understanding how systems change and evolve over time, and the connection to information is really quite profound.
Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Remember how we discussed Boltzmann's entropy formula earlier, and how it's structurally similar to Shannon's information formula?
Yes. It's amazing how these seemingly separate fields, physics and information theory, can be so interconnected.
Absolutely. And that connection points to a really deep insight. Information is fundamentally linked to how we perceive and organize the structure of a system. The more we know about how a system is arranged, the more accurately we can describe it using information.
So thinking back to our messy room analogy, a tidy room has lower entropy because we've imposed order on it. We know where things are, so we can describe that arrangement using a relatively small amount of information.
Exactly. But if the room is a jumbled mess, it takes a lot more information to describe its state. There are just more possible arrangements, more uncertainty, and therefore more entropy.
So in a way, information is like the opposite of entropy. It's about reducing uncertainty, bringing order to chaos, creating patterns that we can understand.
That's a fantastic way to put it, and oninformation.txt takes this even further by suggesting that the very act of observing a system, of gaining information about it, can actually change that system's entropy.
Well, wait a minute. Are we saying that just by looking at something? We can change its fundamental nature. That sounds like something out of quantum physics.
It's not quite that simple, but you're on the right track. The key is to remember that information is always observer-dependent. It's about how we perceive and interact with the world.
So different observers might perceive different levels of entropy in the same system.
Exactly. Think about a deck of cards. To someone who doesn't know how to play, the deck might appear as a random collection of symbols. But to an experienced player, the deck has a clear structure and order. They can instantly recognize patterns and probabilities that are completely invisible to the untrained eye.
That's such a great example. It's like the information content of the deck changes, depending on the observer's knowledge and experience.
Precisely. And oninformation.txt suggests that this applies to all systems. From the microscopic world of particles to the vastness of the cosmos, the information we extract from a system is always filtered through our own perceptual lens, our own understanding of the world.
So are we back to the question of whether there's such a thing as objective reality? Is everything just a matter of perspective?
That's a profound question, and one we'll continue to explore. In the final part of our deep dive into oninformation.txt, stay with us.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final part of our deep dive into oninformation.txt. We've covered a lot of ground, from hard drives to entropy. But I feel like that big question still lingers. If information is so tied to our individual perception, does that mean objective reality is just an illusion?
Yeah, it's a question that's puzzled thinkers for ages. And oninformation.txt offers a really insightful perspective on this. The source acknowledges that this observer-dependent nature of information lead to a sense of uncertainty. Like, if our perceptions shape what we know about the world, how can we be sure we're all experiencing the same reality?
Right. It's almost like we're all wearing, different sets of glasses, each giving us a slightly different view of the same world. So how can we know what the world truly looks like without those lenses?
Well, the source doesn't suggest that we're each living in separate realities. Instead, it emphasizes the role of shared experiences and communication, and the development of common frameworks in shaping our collective understanding of the world. We're constantly testing and refining our perceptions through interactions with each other and with the world around us.
That makes me think of, scientists, they're always testing their theories, comparing observations, and working together to build a more accurate picture of the universe.
That's a great example. Oninformation.txt highlights the importance of language and mathematics and scientific inquiry in creating a shared framework for understanding reality. These systems allow us to communicate our observations and to test our hypotheses and build a collective body of knowledge that goes beyond individual perspectives.
So it's not that objective reality is an illusion, but rather that we're constantly working together to refine our understanding of it. It's a process of observation, interpretation, and collaboration.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that this process is never truly finished. There's always more to learn, more to discover, more to add to our collective understanding of the universe. It suggests that this constant pursuit of knowledge is what makes the journey so fascinating.
It's both exciting and humbling to think that we're part of this ongoing quest for knowledge. We may never have all the answers, but the search itself is incredibly rewarding.
I completely agree. And oninformation.txt leaves us with a powerful reminder. The pursuit of information isn't just about gathering facts and figures. It's about deepening our understanding of ourselves, our connection to the world, and the very nature of reality itself.
Well said. As we conclude this deep dive into oninformation.txt, I'm left with a renewed sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. I hope you are too.
And perhaps a greater awareness of the profound role information plays in shaping our lives and our understanding of the universe.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of exploration. Until next time, keep those minds curious and never stop questioning.